in pursuit of health and wisdom. Sapio with Buck Joffrey.
So Living Longer for Busy People, that's the short book I wrote for my followers that you can download now for free at sapiopodcast.com. Now, one of the chapters in there is about eating for longevity, and I don't talk about any special fad diets. You know, there's definitely some out there that are better than others. For example, the Mediterranean diet actually has data on it to suggest that you'll live longer if you are on that kind of diet. But that's really not what I focus in on. I focus on big principles, like specifically, I talked about intermittent fasting, really good glycemic control. In other words, blood sugar, and getting enough protein. So what I want to talk a little bit today, though, and really drill down on is this idea of getting enough protein, especially as we age. But for the first question to ask there, I guess, is, well, what's the big deal? You know, what is protein anyway, and why do we need it? Now, you know, some of you probably know the answer to that, but sometimes it's nice, rather than just to throw around this terminology, to understand a little bit more so that we can actually have some good reasons for what we do. So proteins, what are they? They're essentially molecules in our bodies that carry out a vast range of functions. In fact, I would say that it's probably a reasonable thing to say that we're mostly made up of protein and water, right? Proteins are an essential component to the structure, to the function, and the regulation of the body's tissues and organs. Muscle, bone, skin, hair, you name it. Protein everywhere. Now, each protein is made up of a string of smaller units, and those units are called amino acids. Now, they're the building blocks of proteins, and they link together in long chains, and that's what becomes a protein. By the way, if you're wondering, in case you've heard the word peptide, peptide is just a smaller string of those amino acids together. That's sort of like a mini protein. But anyway, that is what it is. That's what a protein is. It's a bunch of amino acids that are sticking together. Now, there are 20 different amino acids. So when you talk about different proteins, it's basically combining those different amino acids in various ways to make the protein, just like the 26 letters of the alphabet can be arranged in many different ways to form many different words. What I personally think is totally crazy is that those 20 different amino acids, they can be arranged in combinations to give you anything from insulin hormone to muscle protein, right? Now, where do we get these amino acids? Well, we can make some out of other molecules that we eat and ingest and that we have in our body. And then there's others that we have to get from our diet. The ones that we have to get from our diet are called essential amino acids. And we call them essential not because they're the only ones that are important. We call them essential because it's essential you eat them if you want to stay alive. There's no way of your body can make them. So what happens? We digest animal or plant proteins down into individual amino acids. Then we take those individual amino acids or fragments of proteins, again called peptides, and we build stuff that we need for our own bodies. Now, obviously, we need protein throughout our lives. This is probably most obvious in the natural decline our bodies undergo in muscle mass. So muscle is basically all protein, and this decline in muscle mass and strength is called sarcopenia. This phenomena typically begins, believe it or not, in your 30s, and it's gradual, so you might not notice it at first, but adults lose approximately 3% to 8% of their muscle mass per decade after the age of 30. And after the age of 60, it accelerates much, much faster. So why do we care if we lose muscle mass? With reduced muscle mass and strength, balance and coordination get compromised, and that makes falls more likely. And that may not seem like a big deal to you right now, but the consequences of falls are severe when you become an elderly person, and they can lead to fractures and significantly increase the risk of disability and mortality. Lots of people die ultimately of hip fractures. Now, beyond falls and fractures, sarcopenia also contributes to a decline in overall metabolic health, exacerbating chronic conditions, those conditions we've talked about plenty of times before on this show, like type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease, and ultimately it affects life expectancy. Why? Well, because, like I said before, we're basically made up of protein and water, right? Diabetes, why do you get diabetes? Insulin insensitivity, right? Insulin is made up of protein. Cardiovascular disease, blood vessels are made of protein. You get the idea. So the way I think about it is that sarcopenia, which is specifically related to the loss of muscle mass as we age, is kind of like the canary in the coal mine, suggesting really a problem, a global problem of protein utilization. And that's something that's really important. Now, we talked about falls when it comes to muscle mass. There's a meta-analysis, which is basically a combination of, several different studies to create one big study. And what that found is that individuals with sarcopenia had a 3-fold increase in all-cause mortality compared to those without. So its prevention and management are really pivotal. Therefore, its prevention and management are pivotal in promoting longevity and ultimately improving life expectancy. Okay, so you get the point. If you plan on living longer, you're going to need to avoid or at least slow down this whole concept of sarcopenia or muscle mass loss. There are other factors other than nutrition that are involved in avoiding sarcopenia, namely exercise. But I want to focus in on what you can do from the perspective of diet to minimize this downward spiral in muscle mass. As you probably assumed, eating more protein decreases the rate of sarcopenia as we age. So how much protein should we eat anyway? That is a question that I don't know that there's a clear answer to, right? The data from studies suggests that higher protein intake, and when we say higher protein intake, they're referring to, say, 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight per day for older adults. That's associated with better maintenance of muscle mass and function. Now, for those of us who don't weigh ourselves in kilograms and prefer pounds, that's about a 0.5 gram of protein per pound per day, okay? So just keep that in mind, a 0.5 gram per pound per day. So for me, I'm 215 pounds, so that's going to be about 107.5 grams of protein is what those studies that are showing better maintenance of muscle mass and function. Now, that number is higher than the general recommended dietary allowance or RDA for protein, which is actually 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. But I will say that there's some very, very smart people in this field of longevity that are suggesting up to 1 gram per pound. Now, that's a lot of protein. Now, for someone like me, 6'4", about 215 pounds, that's 2 16-ounce steaks per day. And as I'm not a bodybuilder, I feel more comfortable sticking probably closer to that 0.5 gram per pound recommendation. And mostly because I just don't know what happens with 1 gram per pound over a long term. I don't want to accidentally destroy my kidneys in the process. So personally, again, it's not advice, but that I personally am trying to hit at least maybe 100, 110 to 115 grams of protein per day. But here's the thing. When I was writing this book that I keep mentioning, I started thinking that, you know what? I'm not sure that I get that much protein from the way I eat. I mean, I don't eat a 16-ounce steak every day, although don't get me wrong, I love steak and I probably would eat a medium rare ribeye every day if I thought it was healthy for me. And as much as I'd love to eat one of those every day, though, I also buy into this research out there that's suggesting that too much red meat can potentially increase your risk of cancer. This is where you carnivore diet types are going to really probably start hating on me a little bit. Listen, I love meat too. I get it. And I know you feel great when you're on just this carnivore diet because, you're burning fat and living off of ketone bodies rather than carbs. You're skinny. You got great glycemic control. Your blood sugar's great, in other words. And your brain loves ketone bodies. So you feel sharp and have a lot of energy. Sounds really good, right? But here's the thing. You carnivore diet types are probably significantly increasing your risk of cancer in the future as well. Maybe that doesn't matter to you. That's fine with me. Live for the moment, whatever you want. But understand and know that the link between red meat and cancer, particularly colorectal cancer, is supported by pretty robust data. Now, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, the IARC, the Cancer Agency of the World Health Organization, classified processed meat as a group 1 carcinogen. In other words, it's known to cause cancer. And those might be, like pepperonis and all these other bacon, things like that, stuff that tastes good, I guess, right? And then red meat in general is in group 2A, which is probably carcinogenic to humans based on sufficient data from epidemiological studies. So what about chicken or fish? Well, there isn't really any significant data that skinless white meat chicken or fish cause cancer. So eat away, I guess. Just try not to get mercury poisoning from the wrong kind of fish and that kind of thing. Now, for reference, if you're curious on the fish part, on the fish side or the chicken side, one salmon fillet is about 80 grams of protein, and one chicken breast is about 40 grams. So if I'm trying to get about 110 grams of protein per day, I could get there with like 3 chicken breasts per day or 1.5 salmon fillets, I guess. For me, it's doable. And of course, I haven't even touched upon plant sources of protein like tofu and quinoa, which as a general rule, I don't really like it very much. But I know you vegetarians out there do, or at least that's what you eat, so I totally respect that. And the thing is, you vegetarians and vegans are probably going to need to be careful because you're going to need to eat a lot to make sure you hit your protein targets, particularly vegans, right? Because you're not even getting the dairy or the eggs and all that kind of thing. For that matter, though, at the end of the day, like I said before, I'm convinced that many of us don't eat enough protein. And that got me to thinking about protein supplementation through shakes and bars and all that kind of stuff. So you might ask, does it matter if my protein supplements are animal or plant-based? Now, that's a good question. And when I ask that question, I'm not asking it on an ethical or environmental basis. I'm just talking about straight up biochemistry. After all, proteins are, as we talked about before, they're made up of amino acids, animal or plant protein. So what's the difference, right? Well, typically animal-based protein supplements are primarily made up of these proteins from dairy products, which are called whey and casein proteins. And there's no evidence that they are cancer-causing like, possibly the evidence for red meat shows they are. So if you're doing animal-based protein supplementation, evidence does not suggest you're putting yourself at any additional risk there. Plant-based protein supplements are usually derived from soy, peas, rice, and hemp, and obviously there's no problem with those from the cancer side either. Animal proteins like whey, though, have a high digestibility and contain all essential amino acids in optimal ratios. In other words, we talked about those amino acids that you don't get from your own diet, right? If you're taking whey proteins, you're getting all of those. But not all plant-based proteins contain all essential amino acids. So if you're going to get all your protein from plants, you just got to make sure to eat a variety of different types of plant proteins and make sure that those supplements that you have a variety of different kinds of amino acids. So another issue to think about when supplementing protein is a term called biological value score. Now, let's call that BV for short. BV is expressed as a number of, 1 to 100, 0 to 100, whatever you want to call it. And a higher BV number indicates a protein with a more complete amino acid profile, which is more readily used by the body. In other words, it's a very efficient protein to eat if you're trying to get it into your body. So originally a BV score was characterized as maximum of 100, and it was designated for the egg because the egg was thought to be the highest biological values food there was. However, since then, we've discovered that whey protein has even a higher biological value, and therefore, when you look at whey protein, it is a 104, highly efficient way to supplement protein. Compare that to a 74 score for soy protein, 64 for pea protein. This means your body can utilize a higher percentage of that kind of whey protein than it can those vegetarian proteins. So if you choose plant protein supplements, basically look for those that are combined to offer full amino acid profiles like rice and pea protein together. And also, because there is a certain inefficiency, as we discussed, to eating plant proteins with lower BV scores, you might actually need to eat more of it to get the same amount of functional protein in your body compared to someone taking a whey supplement. So let's think about, practically on how to use all of this information. So if you're focusing on muscle building and repair, whey protein in particular has been shown to be very effective for muscle building due to its rapid absorption. And that absorption, again, the digestibility and all that, the BV score. And also because it has a high leucine content. Leucine is a branch chain amino acid, plays a major role, a key role in protein synthesis. What's also interesting about whey protein is that it's particularly good at making you feel full because its impact on appetite regulating hormones like ghrelin. Basically, ghrelin is this hormone. It's spelled Ghrelin if you're curious. This is involved with feeling full. So if you have some of these supplements and, maybe if you have a problem with snacking at night, maybe you might want to, or a weight management issue because you're snacking, maybe that's something to consider to avoid the late night snack. But to be clear, again, you can get the same outcome with plant proteins. They can also support muscle building, but as I suggested before, you may need to consume more to get the same effect as animal proteins due to the differences in amino acid composition and digestibility. But again, plant proteins are great. They can also provide other nutrients, just fiber, vitamins, minerals, all these things that are inherent to plant sources and that can ultimately contribute to overall health and digestion. So what should you do with this information, right? And again, I'm trying not to be biased here because I think there's a lot of people who are hardcore carnivores, hardcore vegans, and I'm just giving you data, facts. If you're looking to maximize muscle building and you have no issues with dairy, whey protein might be the best choice. And if you're vegan, environmentally conscious, have dairy sensitivities, then plant-based proteins are good alternatives. Just make sure, again, to look for blends to get a complete amino acid profile. So whatever you do, though, just make sure you get enough protein and avoid sarcopenia and really this global problem with protein utilization, which seems to happen with age. Your future self will be grateful. Anyway, that's it for me for this medical update. For Sapio with Buck Joffrey, I'm Buck Joffrey. If you like what I'm doing here, make sure you like, share, and subscribe.
Thanks for listening to Sapio with Buck Joffrey. A quick reminder that while I am, in fact, a surgeon, nothing I say should be construed as medical advice. Now, make sure to include your physician in any medical decisions you make. And also, if you're enjoying the show, please make sure to show your support with a like, share, or subscribe. Until next time, this is Buck Joffrey for Sapio with Buck Joffrey.